Killer's Day, on the planet Willist. The goddess of medicine and healing. The lady of divine salvation, mercy and hangovers. The patient goddess. Liam managed not to groan as the alarm went off. The things you could get used to in a week or so were amazing, and the last 2 days he'd been awake a minute or two before his alarm went off. He rolled over in bed the size of a barge and looked at the time. The clock read 4:28. Time to get up and make breakfast. He turned it into a competition of sorts once he understood the game. The rules were to get up, get dressed, get down to the kitchen, start breakfast before the house, eat, and then either clean the kitchen or load the food truck to make the long drive out to feed the ranchers out in the pasture. Since Belder was out on the range, he'd opted to go on the truck as much as possible. It was harder work, but coming here with her had been the point. Instead, every day had become a routine, seeing to the women running the ranch. The thing of it was, he'd discovered he liked it, and demanding and terse as he was, he decided he liked her Uncle Kelra too. His routine would probably have been different if Pris had been here on the ranch. Getting to know her as anything more than Belle's best friend hadn't been daunting, but it had been unexpected. But then, nothing about the trip had gone as planned. Seeing the ranch and meeting Belle's family had sounded great, but at the time, he'd expected that Belle would finally be here. Instead, she'd been scooped up by the rest of her family, sent out on the range, and he'd only seen her a few minutes every day while dropping off food and supplies. Pris, on the other hand, had practically vanished into town, and while he knew what that was about now, she still all but turned into a ghost. Not that she'd been completely silent, but except for a handful of vid calls and texts, he hadn't heard much from her. Her first call was enough to convince him that whatever it was she was working on, it was important. Pris looked as exhausted as he felt. When they brought her back to the ranch the other day, she promptly collapsed into her room. Given the disaster she'd averted, just not thinking about it seemed best. They could talk about it on the way home, and there was no sense upsetting Belder. Shilvanti women weren't quite as high maintenance with their looks like human girls. A lot less than Shilvanti guys and a bit more than human guys, but Belle and her friends were different. They were nobles, sure. Well, going to be once they inherited their titles, but the academy girls always dressed nicely, and Pris made an absolute point of it. Even the slouching around the cabin on the ship, she'd never gone casual. Outside of the academy uniform, she tended toward the Shilvanti equivalent of a power suit, with a sharp-fitted jacket and slacks. They were just her style, and she looked at home in them. She looked so completely at home that way, you could just tell that was her comfort zone. Belle, on the other hand? Belle could dress up, but unlike Pris, she tended towards ruffles and frills. Still good quality, but it hadn't been until he'd seen her racing out on the back of a Rigoi that she'd looked at home. She always looked good, she just wasn't fastidious about it like Pris. Sleeping out on the pastures, slowly moving the vast throng of very irritable, reluctant meat buses that made up a herd of Turoks. Purple, sure, and tusks at the corner of her mouth, but smudges of dirt and all, she was a cover picture of every country girl. However unlikely, the two had become best friends and pulled Liam along for the ride. Well, in fairness, he'd gone for Belle, and Belle had gone for him at the same time, but there were adjustments. Belle danced. Pris didn't. Well, not much, but she was keen to learn. When not studying for her degree in business, Belle was a Turoks girl. Pris was made for the city, keen on philosophy, debate, and the law. He was from a small town near the city, knew about both worlds, and while he wasn't the glue binding them together, he was comfortable with both of them just as they were. Of course, he hadn't expected to make a boatload of credits when he'd come to Shill, but that was how it had worked out. A fluke deal with him as the token aggrieved human, and he'd wound up rolling in credits. But the weird bit was how he started thinking in terms of Scooby-Doo. The cartoon was way before his time growing up, but you couldn't not know Scooby-Doo. That was like not knowing Superman or Elvis, and after giving it some thought, he decided it was like dating Velma and Daphne, both at the same time. Not only that, they wanted it that way. Sure, he hadn't gone to Willis thinking he'd pick up a second girlfriend. Hope had only calmed down about Belder a couple of weeks before he left, and she'd been on him every minute before he left about not getting into trouble. Now he'd have to explain 2 girlfriends. He hadn't even told Hope about the money. Not yet. She'd worry. She always worried, and that hadn't made getting reacquainted any easier. He'd been too young when she left Earth, and while she kept in touch constantly, even maybe a little desperately, she'd never come back. He understood why. After losing their parents, he'd been stuck with his cousin, Tyler. Hope had gotten lucky. She might not see it that way, but he knew that everything he had on Earth didn't amount to much more than he'd been able to make for himself. Tyler wasn't exactly anyone's idea of parent material, and Hope had created a life here. Over time, she'd even stopped using their codes in the mail, and he could tell this was where she felt safe. None of which mattered as he pulled on his jeans and headed downstairs. Right now, it was time to work. It was hard work, getting the ranch fed and squared away for when the herd came in. The big Ifrovi dance was tomorrow night, too. After that, the main ranch would hunker down for the season, a never-ending routine of moving the herd to different pastures, broken only by times when the hands came in, the annual sale, and Ifrovi. Liam had decided up front he wasn't going to bitch about it. This was Belle's home. He had a room in the big house with an Empress-sized bed so comfortable he didn't want to get up, but Kelra was the challenge. The older Shilvanti didn't seem to think much of him. He wasn't sure if it was because he was a city kid or a human, but whatever it was, he was bound and determined to show that he could handle it. He liked Kelra, but it would be nice if it seemed reciprocated, if only for Belle's sake. Today, they drive the heavy chuck truck out through Willis' rolling hills and endless fields to the watch camp. The drive had grown longer every day, dwindling as the camp moved to the far pastures. There were no air cars over the range as they scared the herds, but now the Turuks were settled in, only a few guards remained to stand guard. The rest had been riding home and would return to the ranch in the morning, including Belle. Tomorrow night they had the big dance. The day after, the 3 of them would board the ship back, so Belle and Pris would arrive for the new semester. Sure, the time here hadn't been a vacation, but not even Hope could have picked at him. He'd pitched in for all that he was worth, doing all he could to make a good impression. This was Belder's life. The main ranch was only one of several, with a lot of hands, several families, and the Sasonas. It wasn't a town, but it was a community all its own. There were no clubs, no nightlife, but after a life with his cousin, this felt good. That was important because he was serious about Belle. The problem was that it didn't seem to make a bit of difference. Oh, he'd made friends with Karlek. While Karlek was older and married, the garrulous Rakiri looked over the other Rakiri living on the ranch and served as Kelra's right hand. He got on well with the other men of the house, and over the last few days, most of them started ribbing him about the girls. After a week here, they'd definitely upped his game on how to cook steaks. The more ranch hands came in, the thicker the women had been around the kitchen. Karlek's daughter had been giving him thoughtful looks, but no more than the others. Belle's younger cousins were too young. Some of the Turuks girls living on the ranch seemed as foolish as girls in any club. Some wanted to bargain over him like a slab of meat, and some spruced up and promised they'd take him into town. All of them wanted to see him at the dance, so when Kelra told them all to push off, it came as a relief. But while he liked Karlek and the other men, Kelra was something else entirely. The man was taciturn and tough as nails. While it might be a woman's world, anyone could see that Kelra was the soul and center of the family. Liam had tried to come into the kitchen first, but no matter what, Kelra was always there. The old Shilvanti would give him a look, say, Mr. Claassen? Then start giving orders. He tried to make the old guy happy. Really, really tried. But with just the big party tomorrow, time had run out. He was still serious about Belder and Pris, so whatever it was, Kelra would just have to get used to it. He was here to stay. The vast ranches on Willist were worlds of their own, and had their own way of doing things. The Avrovi dance was part of that. The one tomorrow was for the Sasona ranches, but it would be followed by another where Sasonas would gather with other families. The irritating thing was the courting dance. The other men explained how the unmarried women would gather in a circle and dance in front of the unmarried guys. If one lingered in front of a guy and he took her hands, well, they went round as a couple, stayed through the song at the end, and that was that. Away from the temples in town, it wasn't a wedding, but he pretty much sealed the deal as far as the ranchers were concerned, and he'd made up his mind to dance with Belder and Pris. The irritating part was that you did not do that without permission from the family matriarch, and for Belder, that meant getting the nod from her uncle. Thus far, he hadn't gotten more than a few terse words, much less any sign of approval. The situation seemed impossible to navigate, and it wasn't as if he could ask Belle. Pris had advised him to be patient, though he'd seen her resolve teetering when he asked her to dance next to Belle. All that was running through his mind as he sat in the back of the truck. He'd offered to come out with Kelra every day, and as the last trip, today was no exception. It was just the two of them, and the ride was long and rough. Almost 4 hours out to deliver supplies to the watch camp before turning for home. Stuck in the back while Kelra drove, they'd passed the rainy drive in silence. The truck was swaying along what passed for a trail, while he clung for dear life to his chair in back. He was swaying back and forth when suddenly the truck bucked wildly, pitched forward, then kept on going. The belt bit hard into his shoulder as the world tossed around him, before shuddering to an abrupt stop. Like most accidents, it was over before you knew it. Liam drew a deep breath and checked himself over. The strap had cut into his side but kept him from slamming his head into the counter. There was the sound of things settling in the drawers and cabinets all around him, when the truck settled with a long groan. Releasing the strap, he stood up carefully. The truck was pitched over at a sharp angle but wasn't moving, and he gingerly made his way forward to the cab. Kelra? Mr. Claassen. Kelra remained sitting with his hands on the wheel, glaring out the front window as if he expected the world to get out of his way. Bending down, Liam peered out the side of the cab. The trail had given way, and a press of mud and loose earth were piled along the side of the cab. The drop from the embankment was only a few feet, but there was no doubt about it. We're stuck. Kelra's stony expression made Liam feel like he just won the title for championship idiot, but he shrugged it off. Sure, it was stupidly obvious, but he'd been sitting in the back. Kelra heaved a long sigh of exasperation, grimacing at the controls accusingly, before setting his hands in his lap. Liam watched him suck his teeth a moment before reaching for the radio. You might as well settle in, Mr. Claassen. We're closer to town than the ranch. I'll make a call. We're far enough from the herds that someone can fly out a lift and pull us out. I'll get out and have a look, Liam offered. You will not, Kelra said sharply, glaring up at him. I saw Grinshaw a mile back, and this truck reeks of food. They won't be far, so sit down. Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom had covered Grinshaw. The episode had been educational. Turoks were huge, bad-tempered monstrosities that made an aurochs look tame. Grinshaw ate Turoks, along with everything else. They were swift, stealthy, and had the temperament of an unstable grenade. Marlin Perkins' lesson was that if you were caught outside with Grinshaw, you stood a good chance of ending up inside a Grinshaw. Liam sat. Kelra called, his eyebrows knitting thunderously, and tossed his underpad down on the seat. Busy. I hate leaving messages, so I'll call back. he rumbled. "Still, it's not like we're off in the city. You take what you can get and make do." "Yes, sir. I could make us some tea if we're going to be here for a while." Liam glanced at the clock on the dash. It wasn't much, but it was better than spending the time in silence. Hopping back into the galley, he picked through the stores. The chuck wagon was provisioned to feed the crews that took it out, as he rifled through the teapots after setting the water to boil. "There's Cambrian black," he called. "I'm not stripping paint off a fence," Kelra said tersely. "There should be some Galanda red leaf." Rifling through the pods, he found the ones with the red top and peered at the Vatica. The maker had used an odd font, but he popped the pod into the carafe, leaving it to steep. "You'd expect an emergency service would have people on call to handle an emergency." Carol was peering at his on-the-pad accusingly, when Liam stuck his head back in the cabin. "A recording from some sappy twink just assured me that my call will be answered in the order received." Tugging out his on-the-pad, Liam swiped it open. There were no texts from Belda, of course. She was out on the range, but he pondered sending a message to Pris. "Our little adventure keeping you from something?" "What?" "You've checked the time twice." Kelra stared at him as he held the on-the-pad to his ear. "You have a date?" "What? Oh, no, sir. It's just I didn't want to worry Pris or Belle. I was thinking about sending them a message." "Well, I'll try not to get in the way of your social life." "It's not a problem. I just didn't want them to worry. Though I expect we'll be back before Belda even hears about it." Kelra didn't say anything, and Liam went back to check on the tea. He turned around with a muffled grunt. The truck had pitched over almost 30 degrees, and the Shvanti was struggling to get out of his jacket. "Let me help you with that." "Thanks. It's not like I'm going outside for a stroll." "I'll hang it in the back. The tea's about ready." Liam folded the jacket over one arm as he braced against the wall. Outside, it was still full daylight, but if this took hours... He shook it off and headed back to the kitchen. "Those unholy bitches!" Liam stuck his head back in the cabin at the sound of real anger. Kelra held up his on-the-pad and shook it accusingly. "They call that cliff singing?"